Before dawn, a whiteout swallowed Gray Pine Pass. Beneath a collapsed wall of snow, a 30-year-old U.S. Marine fought to keep one hand above the ice. Miles away, a stray German shepherd tore at the sleeve of a homeless man and refused to let him stay by his fire. When the dog led him into the pines, the man found more than a survivor. He found the one truth the town had buried for years. Where are you watching from tonight? At 4:17 in the morning, Gray Pine Pass had disappeared. Not under darkness, not under fog, under snow. It came sideways through the pines, thin and hard enough to sting whatever skin the wind could find. The road had vanished first, then the yellow center line, then the black shoulders that told a driver where safety ended. By the time the storm reached the old maintenance station at the edge of the pass, the world had been reduced to three things: the rattle of loose metal, the hiss of snow against plywood, and the weak orange circle of a fire inside a rusted barrel. Elias Boone sat close to that fire, with his coat pulled high around his neck. The coat had once been brown. Years of salt, rain, and northern winters had turned it the color of old cardboard. His knit cap was patched at the crown. His gloves did not match. Neither did the boots beneath his chair. He held his hands over the heat without looking at the flames. Outside, something struck the sheet metal door. Elias lifted his head. It came again. Not a branch. Too quick, too deliberate. A dark paw slipped beneath the narrow gap at the bottom of the door, followed by a wet, black nose and the pointed face of the German shepherd that had begun appearing near the station 3 nights earlier. The dog was lean, but not skeletal. Her sable coat was thick beneath the snow packed into it, and her ears stood high, even while the wind bent the trees outside. Elias had left scraps near the door twice. Both times she had taken them only after he stepped away. Tonight, she did not look at the food. She scratched at the door once, then barked. The sound was short, sharp. Elias frowned. "You picked a bad night to be demanding." The dog barked again. When he did not rise, she shoved her muzzle through the gap and caught the loose edge of his sleeve. Her teeth closed gently around the cloth, not enough to tear it, just enough to pull. Elias looked down at her. For a second, the dog held still. Then she released him, turned, and vanished into the white. He waited for her to return to the door. Instead, another bark came from somewhere beyond the station, farther down the slope and fainter now. Elias leaned back in the chair and stared at the barrel fire. The sensible thing was to stay where he was. The storm had shut down the pass before. It would shut it down again. Search crews would not come for a stray dog, and nobody in town would blame him for refusing to walk into a whiteout before dawn. Then the bark came again, not louder, more desperate. 8 years earlier, a county dispatcher had told him the same thing in a different storm. "Stay where you are. Roads are being handled. You don't know what you saw." He had listened then. His daughter had never come home. Elias stood so quickly that the chair legs scraped the concrete. "Fine," he muttered. "You win." He found an old bent road sign near the workbench, took a tent stake and flashlight, and stepped into the cold. The German shepherd waited 20 yards away, a dark shape half covered in blowing snow. When Elias emerged, she spun and ran. "Slow down," he called, but she did not. The route she chose was not a path at all. It dropped behind the maintenance station through a strip of pines where the snow sat deeper and softer. Elias sank past his ankles, then his calves. The wind shoved at his shoulders. Twice he lost sight of the dog completely. Each time, she circled back, appeared at the edge of the flashlight beam, and waited until he moved again. He began to understand that she was not wandering. She was taking him somewhere. The trees thinned after several minutes. Beyond them lay a steep shoulder above the road. Elias could not see the pavement. He could only hear the distant groan of wind crossing open ground. The dog stopped. Her body changed. The restless movement disappeared. Her head lowered. Her ears fixed forward. She stepped across the snow with a care that made Elias grip the bent sign tighter. "What is it?" he asked. The dog sniffed once, then twice. She began scraping at the snow. At first, Elias thought she had found an animal den, or the scent of something buried beneath the drift. Then he saw the shape, not a mound made by wind, not untouched snow. A ridge too straight at one end, a dark patch beneath the powder, glass, a vehicle. He dropped to one knee. The snow there had been pushed hard against the side of the car, packed in uneven layers as if a plow had thrown a fresh wall across the shoulder. He moved closer, clearing snow with the sign in short, clumsy strokes. The dog dug beside him, throwing snow behind her. "Easy," Elias said. "Easy, girl." She did not slow until her paw struck something solid. A gloved hand broke through the snow. Elias froze. The hand moved only once, fingers closing weakly against empty air. Then a man's face appeared beneath the edge of the drift. He was young, 30 perhaps, with dark hair pressed flat by snow and a strong jaw shadowed by short stubble. His eyes were closed, but his chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths. The upper half of his body had been pinned where the driver's door had buckled. Snow covered his shoulders and part of his uniform jacket. Elias had seen enough uniforms in his life to know the shape of one. U.S. Marine. "Hey," he said, his voice suddenly firm. "Hey, you hear me?" The man's eyes opened, brown, dazed, but present. The German shepherd let out a low whine and pressed her nose against the man's cheek. "You're not alone," Elias said. "Stay with me." The Marine tried to speak. His lips barely moved. "Don't waste it. Save your air." He cleared snow around the man's chest, working with the bent sign until his shoulders burned. The aluminum edge caught ice and scraped against metal. The dog shifted beside him, pawing only where Elias pointed, then stopping when he raised a hand. The Marine's breath came quicker. "Name?" Elias asked. The answer took a moment. "Evan?" "Evan what?" "Rourke." "All right, Evan Rourke. I'm Elias. You're going to keep looking at me." Evan blinked against the snow. "Morrow," Elias said, nodding toward the dog. "She brought me." The German shepherd looked from one man to the other, then turned sharply toward the road. Elias followed her gaze. Nothing but white. Still, something was wrong with the snow around the car. It was too loose on top, too fresh. The vehicle had not simply slid into the bank. It had been covered. Elias forced the thought away, one problem at a time. He dug until he exposed more of Evan's chest and the broken edge of the driver's window. Cold air rushed into the trapped space. Evan drew in a breath so sharply that Elias felt it in his own ribs. "Good," Elias said. "That's good. Keep doing that." Evan's gaze drifted toward the trees. "Truck," he whispered. "What truck?" "Yellow plow. It came across." The rest disappeared beneath a ragged cough. Elias leaned close. "Did it hit you?" Evan closed his eyes, then opened them again. "Road was closed," he said. "It shouldn't have been there." Morrow barked. This time she was not looking at Evan. She was staring into the pines. Elias turned. For one long moment, he saw nothing. Then, far beyond the flashlight beam, two pale lights moved between the trees. Headlights. They paused. Morrow's fur lifted along her back. Elias stood as much as the snow allowed, holding the bent sign in both hands. The lights remained still for 3 heartbeats. Then they went out. The darkness afterward felt heavier than the storm. "Elias," Evan said, barely audible. "I'm here. Don't let them know." Elias looked down at him. "You don't get to finish that sentence. You're going to save your strength." He left Morrow beside Evan and fought his way back toward the road. The old emergency call box stood near a buried mile marker, half hidden behind a wall of snow. Elias had used it once before, years ago, when he still wore a county jacket and believed systems existed to help people. The handset was stiff with cold. He pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a woman's voice crackled through the speaker. "Emergency line, state your location." Elias looked back toward the pines. Morrow stood over Evan, her body curved around him against the wind. "Gray Pine Pass," Elias said. "North shoulder, near the old maintenance station. There's a man trapped under snow. He's alive. Can you identify him?" Elias glanced at the dark shape of the Marine's uniform. "Yes," he said. "And you need to send someone now." The wait stretched longer than it should have. Elias returned to Evan and kept clearing snow in careful sections, never yanking at metal he could not see. He spoke because silence made men drift away, telling Evan about a summer when the pass smelled of warm pine instead of diesel and ice. Morrow moved between them and the tree line, returning to touch her nose to Evan's glove. "She yours?" Evan managed. Elias looked at the dog. "No, I don't think she belongs to anyone." Evan watched her through the snow. "Maybe she does now." Elias did not answer. At last, a low engine sound rolled over the ridge. Rescue lights broke through the trees in blurred red and amber flashes. 2 county responders arrived on snow tracks with a medic and a thermal wrap. Their faces changed when they saw Evan's uniform. Then, when they understood how little space had remained around him. Elias stepped back only when asked. Morrow refused to leave Evan until Elias held out his mismatched glove. "It's all right," he said. She crossed the snow and pressed her shoulder against his knee while the medic worked. Evan's hand found Elias's wrist for a moment through the wrap. His grip was weak, but it was there. "You came," Evan said. Elias looked at him. "She came," he answered, nodding at Morrow. "I just tried to keep up." The responders lifted Evan free in slow, measured movements and carried him toward the waiting rescue sled. As the lights shifted, Elias saw something bright against Morrow's sable fur. A narrow streak of yellow paint ran along her shoulder, fresh enough to shine beneath the snow. He touched it with one finger. The color came away on his glove. Beyond the trees, hidden by the storm, an engine started once, then faded toward the far side of the pass. Elias looked down at the paint, then toward the place where the headlights had vanished. 8 years ago, he had let other people tell him what he had seen. This time, with the dog leaning against him and the Marine still breathing behind him, he knew he would not do that again. The first thing Evan Rourke heard was a radiator knocking behind a wall. It was an ordinary sound, too small to belong to the night he remembered. His eyes opened on a ceiling made of stained acoustic tiles. White light hummed above him. The air smelled of coffee, wool coats, and the clean sharpness of a rural hospital trying to stay awake through a storm. For several seconds, he did not move. His body had learned the shape of danger before his mind caught up. Snow pressed against his chest. Metal trapped his hip. A dog's nose touched his face. Then the ceiling returned, and with it came the ache in his ribs and the warm weight of blankets tucked too tightly around him. A woman in navy scrubs sat beside the window with a chart on her lap. She had silver threaded through her dark hair, and the calm posture of someone who had long ago stopped making promises she could not keep. When she saw Evan looking at her, she set down the chart. "You're at Pine County Medical," she said. "You were brought in just before dawn. You're safe." Evan tried to sit. The room tilted at once. Her hand came up, firm but gentle. "Not yet." His throat felt rough. "The dog." The nurse looked toward the hall. "The German Shepherd? She's outside the nurse's station. Animal control has been called, but she hasn't caused trouble." Evan let his head fall back into the pillow. "The man?" The nurse's expression shifted, only slightly. "The gentleman who found you gave the responders the location and left before we could get much more. Do you know him?" Evan looked at the ceiling again. In his mind, Elias was still kneeling in the snow, his mismatched gloves dark with wet ice. "No," he said. "But he knows me better than anyone else does right now." By mid-morning, the storm had thinned into a gray curtain beyond the hospital windows. Snowplows moved slowly along the main street below, their blades making careful passes through drifts that reached the curbs. Evan watched them with a tightness in his stomach that had nothing to do with the pain medication. Every yellow truck looked the same from a distance. Every revolving light made his hands close around the blanket. A sheriff's deputy came in before noon. Her name was Marla Dunn, according to the card she placed on the bedside tray. She was middle-aged, broad-shouldered, and careful with her voice. She did not ask Evan to repeat himself while he was still pale and shaking. She asked whether he remembered driving north or south, whether he had been alone, whether there were any passengers. Evan answered what he could. Then she opened a printed report. "The preliminary finding," Dunn said, "is that your vehicle left the road during severe weather. The shoulder gave way under new accumulation." Evan watched the paper in her hand. "That's not what happened." The deputy did not argue. "Tell me what you remember." He drew a breath, slow enough that it hurt. He had been driving home on approved leave, trying to make the pass before the storm worsened. A barricade had marked the service connector closed. Ahead, through the snow, he had seen yellow lights cut across that barrier. A plow came from the wrong direction, fast and broad in the lane. He had pulled toward the shoulder. The back of his vehicle had lurched. He remembered the sharp turn of the steering wheel, the sound of packed snow striking the doors, and then the side window filling with white. "It crossed a closed road," he said. "It clipped me. Then it pushed snow over the car." Dunn wrote without looking up. "Did you see a company name?" "No, just yellow paint and a dark logo on the door." "Did you see the driver?" Evan closed his eyes. A face flickered there and vanished. Not clear enough? No. The deputy nodded once. Gray Pine Roadworks was assigned to the pass overnight. Their supervisor says the crews were redirected before the worst of the storm. Something in Evan's chest went still. The name had weight now. It belonged to the place where the lights had gone out among the trees. What time were they redirected? Dunn glanced at the report. 3:56. Evan opened his eyes. That's wrong. Why? My phone lost signal at 4:14. I was still on the pass. I saw the plow after that. The deputy studied him for the first time, not with disbelief, but with the careful attention of someone deciding which fact mattered most. Your phone is with the vehicle recovery team, she said. We'll check the record. When she left, Evan stared at the empty chair beside the window. The nurse returned with a paper cup of water and a warning not to drink too fast. You need sleep, she said. You can talk to the deputy later. Evan took the cup, but did not lift it. The man who found me, did he give a name? No. Did anyone see where he went? One responder said he walked toward the old maintenance station. That's all? She hesitated, then lowered her voice. You should know the dog stayed after the ambulance left. She followed the sled until she couldn't anymore. The staff found her sitting by the ambulance bay when they arrived. Evan pictured Morrow pressed against Elias's knee while the medic worked. Can I see her? The nurse considered him, then said, If you stay in bed. Morrow entered the room on a borrowed slip lead, guided by a veterinary officer who looked more surprised than annoyed. She stopped at the doorway first. Her ears moved forward, then back. Her eyes went to Evan's blankets, his hands, the machines beside him. She did not rush him. That was what made him trust her. She looked over every part of the room, as if deciding whether it deserved her. Then she crossed the floor, placed her nose against the side of his bed, and breathed out. Evan held his hand low. After a long pause, she touched it with her muzzle. Yellow paint still marked her shoulder. He saw it clearly now, a bright scraped line against the sable fur. The veterinary officer noticed his attention. We'll clean that once she settles, he said. Evan shook his head. Not yet. The man frowned. It's just paint. Maybe, Evan said, but it was on her when she found me. The officer looked to the nurse, then back to Evan. We can document it before we clean her up. That was enough. A technician came with a camera and small swabs. Morrow disliked the flash, but stood still while Evan spoke to her in a low voice. No one had taught him how to calm a stray dog. He only knew that she had carried a message through a storm, and that every person in the room owed her patience. When the technician left, Morrow lay down beside the bed. Her chin rested on her paws. She did not sleep. Every time footsteps paused outside the door, one ear lifted. Near afternoon, Dunn returned with Evan's phone sealed in a clear evidence bag. The screen had survived. A crack ran through one corner, but the battery log was intact. She placed it on the tray beside the route report. Your last network record was 4:14, she said. That supports what you told me. Evan looked at the printed report again. Gray Pine Roadworks had listed its final pass through the connector at 3:56. 20 minutes separated the two times. 20 minutes in which a snowplow supposedly was not there, a vehicle had been buried, and a homeless man had walked into a storm because a dog would not leave him alone. What happens now? Evan asked. Dunn folded her arms. Now I ask the company for vehicle GPS and shift logs. I ask the county for road closure records, and I find the man who saw you first. Evan looked down at Morrow. You might have better luck with her. The deputy's mouth almost smiled. Maybe, but she can't give a statement. No, Evan said. Neither could the man who saved me, because no one wrote down his name. Dunn's expression tightened. She made a note. Elias, Evan said. His name is Elias Boone. The deputy paused. You're sure? He told me. Where does he live? Evan looked through the window at the fading storm, at the narrow roads leading back toward Gray Pine Pass. That's the part nobody seems to know. After Dunn left, the nurse adjusted Evan's blanket and reminded him that rest was part of recovery, whether he liked it or not. He did not answer. Morrow had risen and moved to the window. Her reflection floated in the glass beside the snow-covered town. Down below, a yellow snowplow turned at the intersection, its lights blinking harmlessly in the afternoon gray. Evan watched it until it disappeared. Then he looked at the empty chair where Elias should have been. The report on the tray said the storm had done this. The dog's yellow-streaked fur, silent and impossible to explain away in that room, said otherwise. Outside, Morrow's ears lifted at a passing engine, then settled only when it was gone. Evan reached for the call button, then stopped. He did not need a nurse. He needed a map, a name, and a reason to believe that the man nobody logged had not vanished before the truth found him. Evan left Pine County Medical 2 days later with a paper bag of prescriptions, a warning not to drive, and the strange feeling that his body had returned before the rest of him had. The town looked ordinary under a pale afternoon sky. Salt darkened the streets. Snow sat in gray piles beside storefronts. A woman carried groceries through the wind, while a boy in a red hat dragged a sled behind him. Evan stood under the hospital awning, with his overnight bag at his feet, and watched a yellow plow clear the far end of the block. His ribs tightened before he could stop them. Morrow sat beside him on a temporary blue leash, alert but quiet. The veterinary officer had cleared her for release to a county stray hold program, but Deputy Dunn had arranged an exception for Evan to bring her along while they looked for Elias. "She knows him," Dunn had said. "That may be more useful than anything in our files." They started at the community outreach center because the nurse remembered a volunteer there mentioning the old maintenance station. The building had been a library once, long before the town added the annex and moved the books to a brighter place. Now, its front windows carried flyers for heating assistance, food pickup, and job training. Evan had expected a desk and a form. Instead, he found a narrow room that smelled of soup, wet wool, and copier paper. A woman with cropped gray hair introduced herself as Ruth Calder and listened without interrupting, while Evan explained why he had come. She looked at Morrow before she looked back at him. "Elias doesn't like being found," Ruth said. "That's different from not wanting company." "Do you know where he is?" Evan asked. Ruth folded a dish towel over the back of a chair. "I know where he goes when the weather turns. I don't know where he is today." Evan felt the old instinct to push, to turn a vague answer into a task with steps and deadlines. But Ruth was not withholding a target. She was protecting a man who had spent years being treated as if his address were the only thing worth knowing about him. "He saved my life," Evan said. Ruth's eyes softened, though not by much. "Then you owe him patience before you owe him thanks." Morrow rose and walked to a bulletin board near the back wall. Her nose moved along the lower edge, past a faded notice about winter bus routes and a handwritten card that said, "Warm meals, no questions asked." She stopped at a photograph of volunteers clearing a trailhead. In the corner of the image, nearly hidden by a snowbank, stood an old maintenance station. Ruth followed Evan's gaze. "That was taken last February," she said. "Elias helped us get supplies through after the county road closed." Evan looked at her. "He still helps?" "People help in the ways they can," Ruth replied. "Sometimes the town notices. Usually it takes a storm." She took a small map from a drawer and circled a service lane behind Gray Pine Pass. "If he isn't at the station, try the shed at the old trailhead. Don't bring the deputy. Don't bring a camera. And if he tells you to leave, leave." Evan folded the map. "I can do that." Ruth glanced toward Morrow. "Can you?" He followed the dog's eyes. Morrow was watching the door, not restless, only ready. Evan understood the question. He had been rescued, but he had not been invited into the rescuer's life. Those were not the same thing. The trailhead sat beyond the last plowed street, where the pines began again and the town's lights became small behind them. Evan rode in Dunn's County SUV because the doctor had made him promise not to drive. The deputy did not speak much. She let the heater run and kept both hands on the wheel. Morrow lay in the back seat with her head up between the front seats. When they reached the service lane, Dunn stopped. "I'll wait here," she said. Evan looked at the drifted road ahead. "You're not coming?" "Ruth told you not to bring a deputy." Her mouth shifted at one corner. "I know when an instruction isn't meant for me personally." Evan stepped out with the map and a thermos Ruth had insisted he take. Morrow jumped down after him. The dog did not pull. She only moved ahead a few feet, looked back, and waited. The shed was smaller than Evan expected. It leaned beside the trailhead parking lot, its roof carrying a heavy cap of snow. Smoke drifted from a pipe made of mismatched stove sections. Elias stood outside with an axe in one hand, splitting thin branches against a stump. He saw Evan before Morrow reached him. The axe lowered. His face did not change, but his shoulders did. They tightened as if the cold had suddenly found a new way inside his coat. Morrow crossed the final distance at a trot. Elias set the axe aside and crouched. She pressed against him once, hard, then turned back toward Evan. "You shouldn't be walking around yet," Elias said. "Doctor says I'm allowed short distances." "Doctors always say that?" "The good ones." Elias looked at the thermos in Evan's hand. "Ruth sent you." "She did." "Then you had soup before you came." "I had soup." "Good." The answer was almost a welcome. Evan stood where he was. "I came to thank you." Elias scratched Morrow behind one ear. "You did that at the hospital." "I don't think I did it well." "Most people don't?" The wind moved through the trees with a dry, brushing sound. Evan looked at the shed, then at the man who had pulled him back from the snow without asking who he was. "Deputy Dunn is down the lane," he said. "She's not coming up." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Why is she here?" "Because I told her the report is wrong." For the first time, Elias looked directly at him. "What report?" Evan explained the 20-minute gap, the roadworks name, the paint documented on Morrow's shoulder. He kept his voice level. He did not tell Elias what to feel about it. When he finished, the older man walked to the shed door and looked out at the pass. "Gray Pine Roadworks," Elias said. The words landed without volume, but Evan heard the weight in them. They were called something else 8 years ago. New name, same office, same people who know how to make a page look cleaner than a road. He opened the door. "Come in before you freeze yourself trying to prove you're fine." Inside, the shed was warmer than it looked. A small stove glowed in the corner. 2 folding chairs faced a crate used as a table. On one wall, Elias had pinned maps beneath clear plastic. Their edges were curled from age. Morrow circled once, then settled on the floor between Evan's chair and Elias's. Not against either man, between them. Elias poured coffee into a dented mug and left the second one empty. Evan did not ask why. "My daughter's name was Mara," Elias said after a while. "She was 24, worked nights at the clinic in town. One winter, the pass was supposed to close before a hard storm. I was still with the county then. I checked the barrier myself. It was down." He touched a line on the oldest map. "But the contractor had an emergency delivery they wanted through. Somebody logged the closure as delayed. Somebody lifted the barrier." Evan said nothing. Elias continued because silence had finally become useful. "Mara called from the road, said she couldn't see the markers. I told her to turn around. She said she was already turning. Then the line went dead." His fingers rested on the map, but did not shake. "They said weather did it. They said the pass was unpredictable. They said I was upset and confused when I told them the barrier had been moved." He gave a short breath that was not a laugh. "Maybe I was upset. Didn't make me wrong." From a tin box beneath the crate, Elias removed a folded photocopy. The paper had been opened and closed so many times that the center crease had nearly vanished. "I kept this after they took the originals," he said. "I didn't know what it proved. I only knew it didn't look right." Evan leaned closer. The sheet was a maintenance route log. Several time entries had been overwritten by darker ink. One correction sat beside a truck number that began with GP. Another sat beside the service connector. Evan pulled the current route report from his jacket. He placed it beside the old copy. The layout had changed. The company name had changed. But the altered time format was the same. A printed entry crossed once, then rewritten in a narrow upward slant. Evan touched neither page. "This is the same pattern." Elias looked at him. "You can tell from that?" "I can tell someone wanted the clock to tell a different story." Outside, a truck passed on the distant road. Morrow lifted her head at the sound, then settled again when it faded. Evan studied the 2 logs until the room seemed to narrow around the ink. The current report said the plow had cleared the connector at 3:56. His phone said he was there at 4:14. 8 years earlier, the old report had moved a closure forward by 19 minutes. Not identical. Close enough to make coincidence feel like a word people used when they wanted to stop looking. Elias folded his arms. "You take that to the county, they'll say it's a copy. They'll say I kept it because I can't let go." "Can you let go?" Evan asked. The question came out before he could soften it. Elias looked toward the stove. "No," he said. "Not of her." Evan nodded. "Then don't." The older man's eyes came back to him. "That's not how it works." "Maybe not," Evan said. "But letting go of her isn't the same as letting them decide what happened." Morrow shifted and laid her chin across the space between their boots. It was a small thing. Still, Elias looked down at her, as if the dog had placed something there neither man had known how to say. Evan's phone vibrated on the crate. The sound was so sudden in the quiet room that Morrow stood at once. He looked at the screen. An email had arrived from an address with no name, only a string of numbers. There was one attachment, a screenshot of a Gray Pine Roadworks shift roster. Near the bottom, a name had been circled in red, Nolan Price. The assigned vehicle read GP17. The route column said Service Connector. And beside the start time, in the same narrow upward slant Elias had shown him, someone had written a correction. Evan looked across the crate. Elias did not ask who had sent it. He only looked at the name, then toward the snow beyond the window. "That truck was on your road," he said. "Now you know whose hands were on the wheel." The bent road sign lay across Elias Boone's crate table, like a thing that had survived the storm, only because nobody had bothered to take it away. In daylight, it looked smaller than Evan remembered. The aluminum was scraped white at one edge, its faded curve arrow barely visible beneath the scratches. Morrow stood beside the table, nose working along the edge of the sign. Her fur had been brushed clean after the hospital documented the yellow streak, but she still paused where the old metal smelled of wet snow, road salt, and something sharp beneath both. Deputy Dunn had brought the sign back from the recovery yard because it marked the exact spot where Elias first reached Evan. She watched from the doorway of the Outreach Center's small conference room, while a county evidence technician set new photographs beside it. The recovery team found fresh yellow paint transfer along Evan's damaged rear panel, she said. It sits beneath the snow crust, so it was deposited before the vehicle was buried. Elias gave a short nod. He did not look pleased to be right. Dunn checked a report on her tablet. The transfer is consistent with commercial snowplow paint. We still need a comparison sample before we name a truck. Evan looked at Elias. Neither man spoke. Morrow's ears lifted at a sound in the hall, then settled again when Ruth Calder passed with a tray of paper cups. "It proves the sign touched a truck," Dunn said. "It doesn't prove who was driving or why." "No," Evan said. His ribs still pulled when he spoke too quickly, but he had learned to leave room around the pain. "It proves we keep looking." Dunn met his eyes. "That's what I intend to do." Elias stepped away from the table and went to the window. Outside, the town's afternoon traffic moved through patched snowbanks. A delivery van turned past the center. Two men in reflective jackets crossed the street toward the hardware store. Elias watched them until they disappeared. "Looking costs people things," he said, "sometimes more than they have." Dunn did not answer with a promise. Evan respected her for that. June Kessler arrived just before 3. She stood in the doorway with a wool coat buttoned to her throat and a leather folder held close against her chest. She was younger than Evan had expected, perhaps early 50s, though there was a tiredness around her eyes that made age hard to judge. Her auburn hair was tucked behind one ear. She saw Elias first. Whatever greeting she had prepared left her face. "Hello, Elias." He did not turn from the window. "June." The way he said her name made it sound like a record being taken from a shelf after years in storage. She looked at Morrow, then at the bent sign, then at the route log copy on the table. "Deputy Dunn told me about the current report," she said. "I didn't think anyone still had the old one." "I did," Elias said. "You knew that." June's fingers tightened around the folder. "I knew you had a copy. I didn't know you kept it all this time." Elias turned then. He did not raise his voice. That was worse. "What did you think I kept when they told everyone I was confused?" June swallowed. "I thought you kept your daughter." The room went still. Evan looked down at Morrow. The dog had moved closer to Elias's boots, not touching him, only staying near. June placed the folder on the table. Inside were printed maintenance records, an unsigned memo, and a thin envelope with a county seal. "I worked records then," she said. "The night Morrow was on the pass, I saw 2 versions of the closure report. The first one said the barrier was down at 6:12. The second said it was delayed until 6:31. I was told the first was a clerical draft." "By who?" Dunn asked. June looked at the window. "Hank Veller? He wasn't manager yet. He handled contractor coordination." Evan felt the name settle in the room. June continued. "He said the county needed one clean report while families were waiting for answers. He said an unfinished draft would make people panic. I believed him because I wanted to. I had a mortgage. I had a son in college. I told myself the people above me knew more than I did." Her voice thinned. "Then Elias lost everything, and I never found a way to hand him the pages without admitting what I had done. Elias looked at the unsigned memo. You had 8 years. I know. Dunn gathered the records carefully. This is enough to open a formal review of the old file, she said. But I need the current vehicle data. June nodded toward the photograph of Morrow's painted shoulder. Then, look at their yard. GP17 was repainted after a collision last winter. The company buys its paint through Marrow Supply on the South Road. I processed the invoices. Evan looked at Morrow. The dog had been quiet during the conversation, but at the word yard she stood and faced the door. She did not know what an invoice was. She knew a smell. Dunn noticed it too. We'll get a warrant for samples, she said. No one goes on to company property without one. The warrant came the next morning. Evan stayed in Dunn's SUV at the public road, while she and a state inspector entered the Gray Pine Roadworks yard. Elias sat beside him, arms folded, watching the gate. Morrow was in the back seat, restless but controlled. The yard looked harmless from a distance. Rows of plows, salt bins, stacked tire chains, a small office with flags snapping beside the door. Yellow paint covered every truck, every blade, every barrier. Evan understood how easy it would be to hide a truth inside a color everyone expected to see. Then Morrow gave a low sound from the rear seat. Not a growl, a breath caught halfway out. She had pressed herself against the window. Her nose pointed toward the far line of plows, where one vehicle sat apart from the others beneath a loose tarp. Dunn emerged from the office at that moment and saw the dog. She followed Morrow's gaze. A few minutes later, the tarp came off. GP17 had a new section of paint on its rear corner, bright and smooth against the older yellow around it. The inspector photographed it, then took a small sample from the edge where the colors met. Morrow watched until the yard gate closed again. Evan turned around and rested one hand against the seat. Good girl, he said. She looked at him once, then turned back toward Elias, as if the praise belonged somewhere else. The lab report did not solve the case. Dunn made that clear when she returned to the outreach center that evening. The paint is consistent with GP17's contractor batch, she said. It supports the contact. It doesn't establish intent. Elias sat at the soup table with his hands wrapped around a cup he had not touched. Intent always gets the longest word, he said. Dunn pulled out a chair. Evidence is how we keep someone from changing the story later. Elias gave her a look that held no argument, only fatigue. Evan sat across from him. Nolan was on that route, he said. The roster says so. And if he was? Elias asked. He may be scared. He may be. Then we give him a way to tell the truth. Elias looked at Morrow asleep beside the radiator. That works better for people who have a door to close behind them. Evan's phone vibrated on the table. The sound cut through the room so sharply that Morrow was awake before he reached for it. One message, no greeting, no number he recognized. I saw him get out. Evan read it twice. Then a second line appeared. He told me to keep driving. Elias stood so fast that his chair tipped backward. Dunn caught it before it struck the floor. Don't answer yet, she said. We preserve it first. Evan held the phone in his palm. He's talking about Hank. Dunn nodded. Probably. The words sat between them, unfinished and dangerous. Morrow paced once, then stopped at the door. Outside, headlights swept across the center's front windows. The next morning, Hank Veller stood on the courthouse steps in a charcoal coat, speaking into a row of local microphones. Evan watched from the outreach center television, with Ruth, Elias, Dunn, and Morrow gathered nearby. Hank's hair was silver at the temples, his smile measured and calm. He did not mention Evan by name. He called the incident unfortunate. He praised first responders. He said Gray Pine Roadworks would cooperate fully. Then he spoke about Elias. We should all be careful, Hank said, about letting old grief turn into accusations. Mr. Boone has faced serious hardship, and we hope he receives the support he needs. Elias did not move. That was the first sign that the words had reached him. The second was Morrow. She rose from the rug and walked to his chair, placing her head against his knee. On the screen, Hank continued, speaking softly about compassion and facts as if they belonged to him. Evan watched Elias's hand settle on the dog's neck. The yellow paint, the bent sign, the root logs, the message on his phone. None of it had become justice yet, but Hank had made one thing plain. He was not afraid of the storm. He was afraid of the man everyone had decided not to see. The community hall had once been built for dances, election nights, and pancake breakfasts. On the evening of the hearing, it held folding chairs in crooked rows and people who kept looking toward the door whenever it opened. Snow had begun again before sunset, not the hard whiteout that had buried Evan, but a steady fall that softened the parking lot and collected on the shoulders of everyone coming in. Evan arrived with Deputy Dunn and Morrow. Elias came separately with Ruth Calder, walking slowly beneath the awning as though every step toward the building required a decision. He wore his patched brown coat. He had not borrowed a better one. Evan understood why. The room had spent years deciding what Elias looked like. He was not going to arrive dressed as someone else to make them listen. At the front stood a long table for the county review panel. Beside it, a smaller table held folders, printed maps, and a laptop connected to a projector. Hank Veller sat with two attorneys near the first row. He looked composed in a dark suit, his silver hair neat, his hands folded around a legal pad. Nolan Price was not there. Neither was June. Evan felt the absence in the room like an empty chair at a family table. Morrow stayed close to Elias, not pressed against him, but near enough that the tip of her tail brushed his boot each time she shifted. Ruth handed Elias a cup of coffee. He accepted it and held it without drinking. The chair of the panel, a retired judge named Miriam Vale, opened the hearing with a reminder that it was not a trial. The county would review the road closure, contractor logs, emergency procedures, and the incident that sent Evan beneath the snow. "We are here to establish facts," she said. "We are also here to determine whether our systems made it harder to see those facts." Her voice carried without force. Evan watched Elias when she said it. The older man looked at the floor. Hank spoke first. He was careful. He praised the responders and expressed relief that Evan had recovered. He said Gray Pine Roadworks had worked through severe conditions with limited crews and had followed the county's emergency directives. When he reached the subject of Elias, he softened his tone. "Mr. Boone has endured a terrible personal loss," Hank said. "We all recognize that, but grief can make old events feel connected in ways that records do not support." A few people shifted in their chairs. Evan felt heat rise under his collar. Hank had not called Elias a liar. He had done something smoother. He had made truth sound like a symptom. When the panel called Evan, he walked carefully to the microphone. His ribs had healed enough that the ache came only when he forgot it was there. He stated his name, his service branch, and the basic facts of the storm. He described the barricade, the yellow plow crossing the closed connector, the impact that pushed his vehicle toward the shoulder, and the snow packed over the driver's side. He did not embellish what he had not seen. "I cannot identify the driver from the storm," he said. "I can identify what I remember. The truck was there after the road was logged clear. The truck made contact with my vehicle. And if Elias Boone and that dog had not found me, I would not be here to answer questions." One of Hank's attorneys stood for cross-questioning. He was younger than Hank, with a narrow tie and a patient smile. "Mr. Rourke," he said, "you are a trained Marine. You were injured, disoriented, and in dangerous weather. Is it possible your recollection of the route is mistaken?" Evan let the question sit for a moment. "Yes," he said. "That is why I'm not asking anyone to take my memory alone as proof." The attorney appeared satisfied too early. Evan continued. "There is a phone record. There is yellow paint transfer on my vehicle. There are route logs. And there is a man who saw the plow leave the area." He looked back toward Elias. "My uniform does not make my account more valuable than his. It only makes people more used to hearing it." The room went quiet. Evan returned to his seat beside Morrow. The dog looked up at him, then back to Elias. Judge Vale called June Kessler next. June entered through the side door carrying the leather folder from the outreach center and another box beneath one arm. She looked tired, but she did not look away from Elias this time. At the microphone, she identified herself as a former county records clerk. She placed 2 route logs under the projector, one from the night Mara Boone never returned, one from the night Evan's vehicle disappeared under snow. The altered entries glowed large against the wall, different dates, different formats, the same narrow upward slant. "I retain documents that should have been reviewed 8 years ago," June said. "I did not bring them forward because I was afraid of what it would cost me. That was wrong." Hank's attorney objected to the word wrong. Judge Vale overruled him. June's hands rested on the table. "The old record shows a barrier closure was changed after the fact. The current report shows a contractor route was moved off the service connector before the evidence says it could have been. I cannot say why those changes were made. I can say I saw them, and I stayed quiet. She turned toward Elias. I am sorry. Elias did not answer. His coffee cup had gone cold in both hands. Morrow rose and nudged his knee. He scratched behind her ear without looking down. For a moment, Evan thought that was all June would get from him. Then the side door opened again. Nolan Price came in with a woman in a navy coat, carrying a legal aid badge. He looked younger in person than he had in the roster photograph. His hair was damp from snow. His shoulders were drawn tight as wire. When he saw Hank, he stopped. The legal aid attorney touched his elbow, and he moved again. Hank's face did not change, but his hand flattened against the legal pad. Deputy Dunn stepped toward Nolan, spoke quietly, and led him to the witness table. Nolan's first answer came so softly that Judge Vale asked him to repeat it. I was driving GP-17, he said. I was on the service connector. He described starting his shift late the previous afternoon, then staying on after the replacement driver failed to arrive. He had told dispatch he was too tired for the upper pass. He had been told to take the shortcut anyway. Mr. Veller said the county wanted the road open, Nolan said. He said if I logged the route clean, someone else would handle the paperwork. Hank's attorney rose. Mr. Price, are you saying you chose to disobey safety guidance? Nolan looked at the table. I'm saying I did. I'm saying I should have stopped. I didn't. His voice broke, but he went on. The plow had crossed the barricade. Evan's vehicle appeared through the snow. Nolan had tried to correct, but the blade in the truck's rear corner made contact. Evan's car slid into the shoulder. A fresh berm gave way over the driver's side. I saw him get out of the car window, Nolan said. I saw his hand. Mr. Veller called and told me to keep driving. He said rescue would be sent. The room held its breath. I asked if I should turn around. He said not to create another incident. Elias stood so abruptly that Ruth reached for his sleeve. He looked at the exit. Evan recognized the movement. It was not cowardice. It was a body remembering what rooms had done to it. Morrow moved before anyone else did. She walked to the doorway and lay across the threshold, head on her paws, facing Elias. She did not block him with force. She simply made leaving require him to see her. Elias stopped. His eyes went to the dog, then to the people in the chairs, then to the microphone waiting beneath the county seal. Judge Vale called his name. Elias did not move. She called it again. Mr. Boone, would you like to speak? He looked at Ruth. She gave him no instruction. He looked at Evan. Evan only nodded once. Then Elias walked toward the microphone. His coat brushed the first row of chairs. He stood there for a moment with both hands resting on the wooden podium. My name is Elias Boone, he said. His voice was low, but it reached the back a wall. My daughter was Mara Boone. She was 24 years old. She was on Gray Pine Pass 8 years ago because the road was supposed to be safe enough to use. It was not. He paused. I have been called many things since then. Upset, difficult, unreliable. I may have been upset. I was her father, but I was not wrong. The silence in the hall changed. It was no longer waiting for him to fail. It was listening. He told them about the barrier he had checked, the call from Mara, the changed log, the years he spent avoiding places where people knew his name. He did not ask for sympathy. He did not mention housing. He spoke only about the road and the price of treating a warning as an inconvenience. When he finished, Morrow crossed the hall and sat beside him. Elias placed one hand on her neck. For the first time that night, he looked directly at Hank Veller. Deputy Dunn connected the GPS report to the projector. A blue map filled the wall. One point marked Evan's phone signal at 4:14. Another showed GP-17 idling 80 yards from the shoulder at 4:16. The contractor report claimed the truck had already left the connector 20 minutes earlier. The timestamps did not bend. They did not need interpretation. Judge Vale looked from the screen to Hank. Mr. Veller, she said, do you wish to amend your earlier statement? Hank said nothing. Outside, snow kept falling against the hall windows. Inside, Elias Boone stood beside a stray dog and watched the truth remain exactly where it was. The hearing ended without anyone clapping. That was how Evan knew something had changed. In other rooms, people applauded when a story gave them permission to believe it was finished. This room understood that a GPS point, a route log, and a man's testimony were not an ending. They were a door opening onto work that should have been done years earlier. Judge Vale ordered the county to preserve all Gray Pine Roadworks records. Deputy Dunn took Nolan's statement with his legal aid attorney beside him. Hank Veller left through a side exit without speaking to the reporters waiting outside. Elias watched none of it. He sat in the last row, with Morrow's head resting on his boot, and looked at the map still glowing on the wall. At 4:16, GP-17 had been 80 yards from Evan's buried vehicle. The blue point did not explain Mara. It did not return the years Elias had spent sleeping where a door could be locked against him, but it remained on the screen after everyone else had left, clean and steady, refusing to become something easier. Evan sat beside him. "You want me to ask them to turn it off?" Elias shook his head. "No." He looked at the point once more. "I spent a long time thinking I needed somebody to tell me I wasn't wrong." Morrow shifted at his feet. "Turns out, I needed somebody to stop telling me I was." The formal investigation moved slowly, as investigations did. The county placed Gray Pine Roadworks under emergency review. Inspectors collected GPS units, vehicle maintenance reports, overtime records, and dispatch calls. They found that Hank had approved repeated shortcut routes during storms, then asked staff to align paperwork with whatever version of the night kept the contracts clean. The review did not pretend every winter incident had one cause. Weather remained dangerous. Roads remained narrow, but the evidence showed that safety guidance had been treated as flexible whenever schedules or money were at stake. Hank was removed from operations while the case continued. Nolan accepted responsibility for driving past safe hours and for leaving the scene, but his cooperation gave the investigators the missing sequence of decisions. The county board made changes that sounded small when read aloud and large when people depended on them. No contractor could reopen a closed connector without a logged county authorization. Route changes would be recorded automatically, not copied from handwritten sheets at the end of a shift. Drivers who reported fatigue would be removed from the route without losing the next week's work. The emergency call boxes on Gray Pine Pass were repaired, tested, and marked with reflective signs. Ruth Calder attended the meeting where the new rules passed. She sat beside Elias and whispered that he had made the county buy better lights. Elias told her not to make it sound heroic. Ruth said, "Then don't make it sound small." June Kessler came to the outreach center one morning, carrying a box of old files. She did not bring it to Elias's table. She set it with Deputy Dunn and asked that every page be scanned into the county archive. Then she found Elias near the coffee station. Morrow was lying under his chair, one ear turned toward the room. June stood there longer than she needed to. "I can't fix what I did," she said. Elias poured coffee into his cup without looking up. "No," she nodded, "but I can stop hiding it." That he considered. Finally he said, "Do that." It was not forgiveness. It was not punishment. It was the first honest thing either of them had said to the other in years. Evan completed physical therapy in the weeks that followed. The work was plain and repetitive: stairs, balance, controlled turns, a therapist reminding him that strength was not measured by how little help he accepted. He disliked that sentence every time he heard it. He also followed every instruction. On the last day, he walked the length of the clinic without favoring one side. His therapist handed him a printed clearance note and said he could return to duty after final review. Evan looked at the paper, then at the snowy parking lot outside. "I thought surviving the pass would feel like the hard part," he said. "It was," she answered. "Recovering is just the part nobody can do while you're unconscious." He returned to Gray Pine before reporting back. Not to the pass, not yet. He went to the outreach center with a bag of dog food in one hand and a stack of forms in the other. Morrow had completed the county stray hold period. No owner had come forward. No microchip record had appeared. The veterinary officer explained that Evan could apply to adopt her. So could Elias. Evan had already filled out his portion, but he had not signed it. Elias found him at the back table and raised one eyebrow. "What's all that?" Evan put the forms down. "A choice." Elias looked at the first page, then at the dog sleeping beside the radiator. "You're the Marine with a decent place to live," he said. "I'm the man they've been trying to help live somewhere decent." "That's not the question." "It's always part of the question." Evan nodded. He had learned not to argue with facts just because they made him uncomfortable. "Then we wait until your housing is settled," he said. "And you decide whether to sign. She can tell us where she feels safe." Elias gave him a skeptical look. "Dogs don't fill out forms." "No," Evan said, "but they know who they trust." The housing offer arrived through Ruth, not as an envelope slid across a table, but as a conversation held over soup. The county had opened a small supportive housing program above the old fire station, close enough to the outreach center that residents could walk there, and far enough from Gray Pine Pass that the wind did not sound like it was knocking at the walls. Elias was offered a ground-floor apartment because stairs bothered one knee more than he admitted. He could say yes or no. No deadline was attached to the first answer. Ruth handed him a key card to inspect the place before deciding. Elias stood outside the apartment door for nearly a minute. Evan waited at the end of the hall with Morrow. The hallway smelled faintly of new paint and laundry soap. It was quiet in the ordinary way. Buildings were quiet when no one was afraid of the weather. Elias put the key card against the lock. A small green light appeared. He opened the door. The apartment was not large. It had a kitchen with 2 cabinets, a window facing a line of bare maples, a bedroom, and a small living room with a radiator beneath the sill. Nothing in it knew his name. That was what made it difficult. Elias walked through slowly. He opened the closet. He checked the window latch. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the empty counter. Then he stepped back into the hall. "It's too clean," he said. Ruth laughed once. Evan did not. He only asked, "Do you want it?" Elias looked over his shoulder at the room. Morrow had walked past both men and into the apartment without being invited. She sniffed the corners, circled the living room once, and lay down in the patch of sunlight near the window. Elias watched her. The dog sighed, long and deep, as if she had been carrying the storm in her chest and had finally set it down. "I'll take it," he said. Spring arrived slowly. Snow retreated from the shoulders of Gray Pine Pass and left sand, gravel, and flattened branches behind. The county placed a new reflective closure gate at the service connector. A plaque nearby named the Emergency Callbox Program after Mara Boone, not as a monument to loss, but as a promise that no warning would be dismissed because it came from the wrong person. Elias did not attend the small dedication. He said public things made him tired. But Ruth took a photograph and brought it to his apartment. He placed it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a pine tree. On Evan's last afternoon in town, he arrived at the apartment in civilian clothes with his duffel bag over one shoulder. He had been cleared to return to his unit the next morning. Elias opened the door before he knocked. "You're early," he said. "You're getting good at guessing who's outside." "No. Morrow heard your truck." The dog came from the living room, carrying a worn tennis ball. Evan crouched. She placed it at his feet, then ran 2 steps to Owen and looked back. "That seems like a vote," he said. Elias leaned against the doorframe. "She's been practicing democracy." Evan sat on the floor and rolled the ball across the rug. Morrow chased it, returned it, and finally settled between the 2 men. Her coat had filled out. The yellow paint was gone. Her ears still lifted at engines, but they lowered again when she saw Elias and Evan in the same room. Elias had signed the county adoption form that morning, making the safe place she had already chosen official. Evan looked toward the window, where late sunlight rested on the maples. "I'll visit when I can," he said. "You don't have to promise things like that," Elias replied. "I know." Evan smiled. "That's why I mean it." For a while, none of them spoke. The apartment held the sound of the radiator and Morrow's slow breathing. Outside, a city bus passed on the street below. It was just a bus, just a road, just an ordinary afternoon. Elias reached down and rested his hand on the dog's neck. Evan sat beside them, with his duffel bag waiting by the door. Neither man had been saved from every hard thing. Neither had been given back what winter had taken. But Gray Pine Pass no longer owned the whole story. In a warm room with a dog asleep between them, it had become only the place where someone stopped, listened, and refused to walk away. Elias Boone did not begin the story looking for a hero. He was trying to keep a small fire alive through a storm, the way he had done for years. Evan Rourke did not begin it expecting to need anyone. He had spent his life trusting training, discipline, and his own strength. And Morrow had no words for either of them. She only knew that someone was in trouble beneath the snow, and that walking away was not an option. That is what changed Gray Pine Pass. Not one dramatic speech, not one uniform, not one perfect piece of evidence. It changed because a stray dog kept coming back, because a man society had learned to overlook chose to follow her, because Evan used his voice to make room for Elias's voice instead of speaking over it, and because, in the end, Elias stood before the town and said his own name. Morrow became more than the dog who found a Marine. She became the quiet proof that care does not need a title to matter. She did not solve the case. She did not understand route logs or GPS points. But she made the first choice that allowed every other truth to surface. She stopped, listened, and refused to leave someone buried alone. There may be people around you who feel unseen because life has taken too much from them. There may be someone whose voice is easy to dismiss because of where they sleep, what they wear, or how long they have carried grief. Today, you do not have to solve their whole story. You can offer a meal, a ride, a patient question, or the dignity of listening without deciding the answer first. And if you are the one who feels buried beneath worry, loss, or loneliness, remember this. Needing help does not erase your strength. Sometimes help arrives through a stranger, sometimes through a dog, sometimes through one person who chooses not to walk past you. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who may need that reminder. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight, and stay with the channel for more stories about courage, loyalty, and the quiet ways people find their way home.